Hello, Strasbourg to you and welcome. I'm Billy Bigham from the Russian American Business and Culture Council, and I'm here with Per Han. Per is one of our board members and a partner at the consulting firm Carney. He has advised companies across the US, Europe, and Russia in a range of industries with a focus on consumer products, life sciences, and healthcare. From 2010 to 2016, while based in Moscow, he served as the managing partner of Carney's unit in Russia. He now resides in Minneapolis. Per, thanks for joining me.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Billy.
Yeah. So tell me, could you just give me a little background on your firm and your current role?
Sure. Well, Carney is we're a global management consulting firm, as you mentioned. We have over 60 offices in 45 some odd countries, and we focus on high-value boardroom-related strategy issues, across a range of different industry sectors. My field of specialty, I tend to focus on large-scale, multinational transformations. Really in both the kind of M&A strategy space as well as operations, primarily in both the consumer and health industries. With being a global firm in the way that we are, certainly my career has allowed me to pursue a number of global passions. I'm a very client-focused individual. I started my career in our London office, spent 8 years in the UK, serving clients all through Europe. I then transferred to Chicago around in the end of 2005 period of time, and served as partner in our Chicago office from 2005 until the end of 2009. And then, as you mentioned, from 2010 until January of 2017, I was based in Moscow, where I served as the managing partner for our unit in Russia and the Commonwealth of Independent States. Grew our team there and really led that region through 5 consecutive years of double-digit growth. And naturally, also through some of the resetting of the business with the introduction of the sanctions in 2015, 2016 as well. So have a good deal of experience in navigating market uncertainties, supporting clients, and supporting our business, driving through that. And as you mentioned, after when I was thinking about repatriating back to the U.S., I and my family have chosen. I grew up here in Minnesota, and we now reside in Minneapolis, and that's what kind of brought me here.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Yeah, I'll circle back to the sanctions actually as well. But for now, could you describe your business interactions with Russia and Eastern Europe?
Well, certainly. I I guess through the course of our business in Russia, and I can sort of somewhat describe that. And I guess my history, maybe let me take a half step back. I mean, my history in the region dates back to June, I guess, 1987, when I first visited the USSR as a study exchange student. And I was a Russian major in college. I worked, I've worked in and around the region for various different personal, extended study, work experiences for the better part of 30 years now. Prior to Carney, I had also had a short tenure with the World Bank. I worked as a think tank in Eastern Europe and Russia. And then, of course, my period, multiple projects, and then the time that we lived there with the family. So I like to think I've got a pretty intimate knowledge and a pretty deep working knowledge of the business environment and hands-on experience in both advising multinationals as well as Russian corporations. My interactions with different businesses, spans different sectors. Our business in Russia, as we thought about how we addressed the business and started to really stratified across 3 different levels. There are, of course, pure government agencies. You're working with the likes of the Moscow city government and different departments. You have state-owned enterprises like Aeroflot and Gazprom that we worked with extensively. 5 privately held Russian clients that had largely privatized, often in metals and mining and other sorts of logistics infrastructure development, and then also serving multinationals, primarily in the consumer and health sectors, who were actively investing and seeking to grow and build their presence there. So my interactions, within Russia and across the different kind of spans both Russian companies as well as multinationals, and I should say, the network there then also extends. I served as an executive member of the American Chamber of Commerce in Moscow as well, and I served that role for 5 years. So I've interacted at multiple different levels, different pieces.
Yeah, thanks for fielding my broad question.
That was a big one.
Yeah, you passed. Would you say any of those industries, mining, consumer products, is more emerging now than it was before?
Well, yeah, it's that's going to be another broad question, and that maybe speaks to some of the dynamics of where the Russian economy, as well as the overall business environment, certainly exists today, also in how it's pivoted over probably more recently. So Billy, I don't know how deep you want me to go into this. I'm happy to, actually.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so Russia, and we can go back into a bit of a little bit more of a history, but even if you look at it just within the last 10 years, has really gone through some pretty significant highs and some significant lows. Coming out of the previous crisis in 2008, there was a pretty sizable reduction in 2009 in sort of Russia's GDP and overall growth in the economy. But naturally, with that dip, there was a pretty good resurgence that you started to see across most sectors. But the Russian economy, as you know, is a very commodity-driven economy, or a commodity-based economy. So largely dependent on oil and gas, petroleum-based extraction products, certainly minerals, mining, steel, as well as lumber and other sorts of commodity-based products. Certainly there have been multiple efforts, and we can espouse on why, and I'm happy to, some of those have succeeded and not over the years in order to be able to diversify the economy into other sectors. Certainly it is a highly educated workforce, an attractive market. Political environment aside, that many companies are certainly historically have been interested in, and why the likes of Procter & Gamble or Johnson & Johnson or any of the large multinationals are actively engaged in supporting that from a consumer multinational development point of view. In terms of or sort of the digital and high tech sort of sectors, in terms of sectors that naturally where there's the highest opportunity, it is a very resource-rich country, and certainly areas where so continuing to be based in some of those commodity-driven sorts of products is where that is. The notion of attractiveness, however, Billy, if we wanted to get into it, is a delicate one right now, because there are a lot of reasons why, from a foreign direct investment point of view, we've seen outflow from the market, particularly since 2014, 2015, with some of the further challenges politically, as well as some of the economic challenges that are both externally driven as well as a little bit self-imposed. flows that has driven large, where we saw a lot of investment flowing into the country in the early part of this decade. It's been flowing out of the country since, for a variety of different reasons. Nevertheless, it's it's an exciting and a pretty dynamic market, and certainly being able to engage and work there is an important one. So,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah.
How do you be strategic in an environment like that?
How do you be strategic?
Yeah.
Well, it's important to remember in an environment like that to take you need to operate with a long-term view. You really do. So if you are a multinational who is actively invested in there, you are looking to, because over the arc of a 5, 10, 15-year period, naturally it's an economy that and a society that has continued to grow and be able to harvest. Being able to manage, and then making sure you've got the right mitigating sort of actions in place in order to manage through some of the short-term volatility. But precisely because of some of that uncertainty and that short-term volatility, it does scare large portions of the investment community away, because certainly there are more attractive places when you think about capital and financial flows and investment dollars, which are broadly in short supply, or there's a finite amount of those. Naturally, those dollars are going to go into areas, geography, sectors that are more attractive, or more stable, or harvest more short-term returns. And so, the challenge, and I know I operate. While I've spent a good amount of time, certainly as I explained, working in the Russian market, my portfolio and my purview, I work with global clients, and we are operating on a global basis, and so it becomes challenging, with a market like Russia, which has so much potential and so much opportunity to potentially deliver those returns, to be operating in a political and economic environment that does not always deliver that, and so naturally investors start to look elsewhere in other developed markets in order to be able to get a better return on those dollars. So the strategic view is actually understanding that there is this is one country amongst many, but from a Russia perspective, there are important sort of aspects of stability that need to be in place in order to be able to attract those dollars in the long term. Not that I want to get into a political discussion here deeply, really, but that's where some of those issues start to come out. Yeah.
And has the character of that evolved since the Soviet Union, in the post-Soviet era? Has it gone in ebbs and flows?
Well, I mean, so, if you're a student of and an observer of Russia, like we all are, and certainly those who are listening or reading this, I think certainly will be. Of course it is. I mean, what you have to remember is Russia's not the Soviet Union, right? Russia is a new country. I mean, as of 1991, founded in 1991. So effectively, we are 24, 25 years old, as a country, and that has, 30 years old. I wasn't doing my math there. 30 years old as a country, so it's still a relatively new country. And so there are a lot of challenges in the first decade under Boris Yeltsin, where we saw a lot of instability. Putin came to power in early 2000. The 90s certainly was marked by a high degree of both political and societal stability that Putin was able to bring and put in place, with a high degree of economic growth, where Russia was a large growth engine, enjoying high single-digit GDP, year-over-year GDP growth over that period of 2000 till 2009, effectively, when the last crash happened. Since that point in time, it has been underperforming, and much of that GDP growth, you could argue, was also driven and inflated by the price of oil, which went up. what happened in 2014 period was you saw a perfect storm of issues that really drove and took really drove the economy hard. One, of course, there was Russia's decision to be able to annex Crimea from the Ukraine, which put it at odds with the rest of the West, and we can talk about why some of those things are, and I don't want to get into that, but the result was a set of sanctions that were started to be imposed that made it a bit of a separate state, and it was sort of kicked out of the G8 and out of the G, and a little bit separated. And those sanctions were further ratcheted and imposed as it's continued to continue to pursue policies of greater levels of antagonism towards the West, including shooting down the Malaysian Air MH-87, I guess, over Ukraine, as well as other different policies in Syria and elsewhere. But then that was conflated with the crash of oil in 2015 as well, that really forced the deflation of the Russian ruble. And so that combination of sanctions plus oil plus political antagonism that drove dollars out really forced a contraction in GDP of the Russian economy and high degrees of inflation in the period of 2015-2016. We've seen a recovery of the Russian market, after a low base in 2017, 2018, and into 2019. But COVID as well, with the shutdown and the isolation, has yet again been another hammer that has hit the Russian economy. I think the latest projection I saw from the World Bank was expecting a GDP contraction to the likes of about negative 6% GDP decline through the course of this year. And then, hopefully with the economies opening back up, we'll see a little bit of that return. But all of those issues, particularly over the last 5 years, have been compounding on one another, certainly have placed further stress on investment and continues to put more pressure on the economy over this most recent period.
Sure. Yeah. Besides sanctions and pandemics, what other types of uncertainties do you deal with in the Russian market?
Well, there are a number of factors as you kind of look at Russia and sort of the output. The outlook certainly is influenced by multiple economic and political factors that are both a combination of in and out of the country's control. In terms of degrees of uncertainty, again, that's a nice broad question. But
Yeah.
It's one. It is a petroleum-based economy, and despite all of the growth that's been experienced over the last 30 years, it has been unable to diversify itself beyond its dependence on oil. And that is maybe one of the biggest policy missteps I think that you could look at. If I was going to provide commentary on kind of the Russian government, where you've seen many petroleum-based economies actively pursue policies of diversification and moving into areas to be able to attract Western dollars in other sectors. The Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Dubai are certainly big, prominent areas where you can start to point to that. Russia never did, for probably a variety of reasons, but also driven by some of the personal practices of those individuals who sit in power. So a lot of the volatility that you see and a lot of the uncertainty that you see in the Russian economy certainly is driven by the price of oil, which also has inputs on global growth and starts to drive FDI flows. Because of the nature of that, within the Russian economy, monetary policy tends to be highly influenced by trying to maintain sort of those projections, which kind of drives through that. And of course, the other variable beyond sanctions is some of the broader internal Russian political dynamics around civil liberties, protectionism, localization, some of the ease of doing business that starts to happen and starts to occur when you're operating within these markets.
Hong Kong might be dealing with a similar thing now.
Yeah, Hong Kong, has China, and that'll be our next. That could be our next conversation. We kind of talk about China and China policy. But I think each one of those factors in and of itself creates a lot of uncertainty. The confluence of all those factors working together and in parallel as it relates to doing business in Russia and looking at what is the overall stability and outlook for Russia, it starts to form a variety of different dynamics that do create volatility and uncertainty, frankly. But with volatility, there are also pockets of potential investment and return.
Sure.
But given the current environment and the sort of entrenchment of the current political regime, that the elections were run today to be able to rewrite the Constitution to be able to extend Mr. Putin's hold on power now through 2032. It's unlikely that we're going to see any kind of shift, major shift of political reform, short of some other larger external event that's going to be happening. Which, if I was to prognosticate, certainly does not bode well for attracting large levels of Western investment and interest in that market.
Sure. What is the role that private citizens can play in diplomacy through international business? Can they make a big impact, you think?
Well, so that's an interesting sort of question. That's a broader sort of question. So what's the role that one? So what's the role? And so our own business, council and sort of the sort of fostering some of the cultural exchanges to be able to support connection. It is a market that is extremely robust with a great a personal sense of culture and engagement that starts to happen at a personal level. It is also a nation that is just deep and rich in cultural heritage, from some of the most robust Russian literature and books that have written, deep, great composers from Mussorgsky to Tchaikovsky to the ballet to the museums and the artists. So there is a deep level of cultural heritage and exchange opportunities that exist that also provide opportunities to be able to influence and connect maybe in different ways, and certainly roles that private citizens can have and be able to foster some of those cultural exchanges and richness to be able to drive us closer together. I think one of the certainly, I've spent a lot of time, certainly living in the region, working in the region, studying the region. I have a deep, deep passion for much of that cultural heritage and what Russia is and what it certainly can be, and a commitment to continue to help build and develop that. And I think a lot of the ability to be able to drive that connection starts to occur at a personal level too. An understanding of that richness, the linkage into and being able to drive connections to bring certainly the culture closer together, in a globally connected way, because we do very much live in a globally connected society and a globally connected world. We are, and I for one will freely admit my own bias, really, that I am a unabashed globalist when it comes to my own thinking of the world. So we need to be able to draw those connections in order to find the right solutions, both politically, diplomatically, as well as economically, in order to be able to seek to build a better society. Russia is a strong power player. It's a strong economic player. It needs to be part of that solution and not at odds. Cultural exchanges, being able to build personal connections, continue to drive investment is all part of that, and helping build and bridge some of those dynamics that politically start to be driven at odds.
Sure. Yeah, you can develop more respect for each other, and I
Yeah,
would imagine
yeah.
trust in the business world as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and trust also happens at the personal level, right? I mean, you have to be able to look a colleague across the table and look them in the eye and start to build that. Certainly, with that, being able to understand some of the cultural nuances that exist. Food is a very important part of that. Being able to share drink and cultural exchanges and be able to engage in that, to build that level of trust and connection in order to be able to build business, because it is a very trust is an interesting word. I think the way that business is conducted in the society, it is a trust-driven, personal-driven level of business that starts to occur there. And so that ability to be able to bridge connections, to be able to do it, in the Russian language, to be able to build a level of personal work becomes a critical piece of that. And those are the sorts of experiences, as I look back at my own most recent experiences there, and sort of the opportunities and dialogues that I continue to have in the region. Those are the sorts of experiences that I value, and I remember the most, that I enjoy the most. So
yeah, can you tell me about one? Anecdote about maybe a business relationship that maybe relations were cold at first, but then some barriers were broken down.
I guess there's a number of those. I mean, certainly we had, it was not uncommon. For instance, if you had a big meeting, we might go out for dinner and drinks, the night before. CEO or the head of the company.
Sounds like a negotiation tactic thing.
Yeah, a little bit. And some of it's connection, and some of it's starting to work our way through that. I have, but and I will say one of my sort of personal connection levels too. My son was he was young when he was there, but he was a passionate ice hockey player, and very quickly grew up in the Russian youth hockey league. He was the only American who was playing in the Russian 2002 birth year of the Russian Hockey League, and so we actually had a number of connections with other dads about business leaders about my age who also had sons, and we went out and kind of bonded and sort of created those connections. And some of my most fruitful long-term business relationships there were precisely with individuals who had similar sorts of connections in order to be able to build that out, that allowed us to kind of drive those pieces.
Very cool. Yeah, you come from the land of hockey as well, so.
Yeah, well, certainly we're living in it, aren't we?
Yeah.
Right.
So I've got one more question for you. So if you were able to have dinner with any Russian author, what and where would you eat? Who would the author be?
Well, so Billy, I was a Russian lit major when I was in college, and so, for me to pick
it's not your favorite. It's like in this moment, who would it be for dinner tonight?
So there are a number of there are a couple of different authors that I think I would love to be able to speak. I'm a big fan of Lev Tolstoy. Anna Karenina, I think, is a masterful novel. I love his short stories. But Tolstoy was a vegetarian, even a vegan. So I'm not sure I'd enjoy dinner with him very much. Dostoevsky, and is another. Pushkin, certainly Lermontov. But I think, if I was, thinking it through, I think the author I would pick would probably, one of my favorite Russian novels is Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. And, it's if you haven't read it, you should. It's it's a great novel that has a bit of satirical underpinnings of 1930s Soviet Russia, so kind of that. But he comes in the tradition a bit of Dostoevsky, and he was kind of a semi-underground figure when he was writing it. But there are kind of food-wise, because of the nature of his work, I do recall he writes about a feast in the restaurant that's sort of in the canteen of the Soviet House of Writers, and kind of outlines kind of fish layered with different types of caviar and mushroom purees and borscht and different types of pieces, which was a commentary while the rest of the country sort of starved. There was this very decadent fare that was being consumed by these kind of hack writers, who had more or less sold their soul to the Soviet state. So it's an interesting sort of commentary, but he uses food as a mechanism to start to somewhat describe that. I think it would be fun, given some of the social commentary and some of the haves and haves not right now. I would love to have dinner with Bulgakov, be able to discuss Master Margarita, maybe some of the parallels that he observes in the commentary, perspectives that he has in today's world, and some of the irony that he has, and maybe recreate some of that meal in sort of a decadent, sort of traditional Russian fare, and be able to draw that out.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good answer.
How I'd answer that question.
You would have to invite the cat though too. What's the cat?
Yes.
The big cat?
Yes, of course. That would be part of it.
Yeah.
There'd be plenty of food for everybody, so we probably have to invite you could come along too, Bill.
All right. Yeah. Thanks. If you didn't invite the cat, he would probably bust in and jump on the chandelier.
Right.
Swing around on it.
Right. Exactly.
Give it a buck. Okay. Thanks, Per, for joining me.